This is an ABC News special report. Verdict in the Boston Marathon bombing trial. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
And we are coming on the air because the jury deciding the fate of Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev has reached a verdict. They have sentenced him to death. 7 men and 5 women reached this decision after about 14 hours of deliberations and after finding Tsarnaev guilty of all 30 charges against him. That was in the first phase of the trial last month. 17 of those charges could have resulted in the death penalty. All for the crimes of April 15, 2013, when Tsarnaev's bombs and the terror that followed resulted in the deaths of 4 people, injuries to more than 260 others. ABC's Tom Yamas has been in the courtroom for the start of this trial. He's with us from Boston now. And Tom, what's your analysis of when this verdict took hold?
Well, George, really, I think from day one, the day that first victim walked into the courtroom on a prosthetic, or maybe even it was when Martin Richards' father took the stand and described how his 8-year-old son had been killed by this bomb. It was such an emotional time in court, day after day, weeks after weeks, and there were several points when there were witnesses on the stand crying, there were jurors crying, and there were even the public that was watching this trial unfold inside that courtroom crying. Incredibly emotional. This is a huge win for the prosecution. From the get-go, they wanted the death penalty, and they have it. We should mention, at 21 years old, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is now the youngest person on federal death row. Now, they were able to prove this because they said Dzhokhar not only went out there and bombed the Boston Marathon as a political act, as an act of terrorism, but he intentionally wanted to hurt children. They were able to do this by showing that haunting photo of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev at the Boston Marathon 2 years ago, 4 feet behind a row of children. They said he could clearly see there were kids there were kids that were going to be killed. And then after, they showed that famous video 20 minutes later buying milk at Whole Foods. With that video, they were able to start the argument that he was not remorseful. He didn't care about what he had done. And then three months later, I should say, that famous snapshot of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev inside his courtroom holding cell. He looks at a surveillance camera and he gives that surveillance camera the middle finger. Prosecutors in their closing arguments in this phase said there is not a sign of remorse on his face. Now, this is somewhat of a controversial decision because I mentioned the Richard family earlier. They had come out in a Boston op-ed and they had said they actually wanted life in prison. The reason why they wanted that is because if he got life in prison, he would go away, he would leave their lives, there was no chance for parole or appeals, they would never have to see him again. Now, at this phase, now that he's going to get the death sentence, they're afraid there may be appeals. They may still hear from him, and he may never be put to death, or it may take several years. We should mention that since the late 1980s, when they first reinstituted the federal death penalty, 74 people have been on death row, but only 3 have been put to death. One of those, of course, Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh. That being said, there were other victims like Liz Norton, who has been in the courtroom since day one. She was in the courtroom today, along with Carlos Arredondo, the cowboy who was made so famous on that day for his heroic acts, along with the Richard family. They were in court as well. But Liz Norton told me each of her sons lost a leg in the Boston Marathon bombing. It was Dzhokhar's bomb that injured them, and she wanted him to die. There were several other victims also that wanted the death penalty. They wanted justice, and today, we will talk to them later, but I think in their minds, this is justice for them, George.
Okay, Tom Yamas, thanks very much. I want to go to Pierre Thomas, our Chief Justice Correspondent as well. And Tom and Pierre, we just heard Tom mention the possibility of appeals. What does that appeals process look like for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev?
Well, he has 10 days to file a notice of appeals with the First Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston. Then the process will start to unfold. We don't know how long it will take. And George, I would just add, the federal government sought this death penalty primarily for 2 reasons: the heinous nature of the crime and the fact that there was so much premeditation. Law enforcement officials said that they wanted to show the public that they took this case seriously and that the most severe punishment was warranted in this case.
Okay, Pierre Thomas, thanks very much. Once again, the verdict is in. The death penalty for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev on 6 of 17 counts. He showed no emotion at all, no response to that verdict that came in. Of course, as Pierre just said, he will now face the appeal process. We'll have much more tonight on World News with David Muir, and you can get the latest anytime on abcnews.com. I'm George Stephanopoulos in New York. Have a good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.